Good afternoon, everyone. You're watching Interview of the Day, and my name is Galiya Khassenkhanova. And today, I'm meeting with Miss Anita Bhatia, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Miss Bhatia arrived in Kazakhstan for a series of talks with Kazakh officials and to attend Qazaq International Congress, which segues me into the first question. How are the issues of environment overlapping with the activities of UN Women?
Well, thank you for the question, and let me first just say that I'm really delighted to be in Kazakhstan and to be able to attend the Qazaq International Congress. I think it's a really important topic, this issue of the nexus between gender equality, women's empowerment, and climate change. And that's because the effects of climate change on women are different than the effects of climate change on men. Women are disproportionately affected by climate change because they are often the people who are carrying water in parts of the world where there isn't much water. They are the ones who are scrambling to pick up the children when there is a tsunami or an earthquake. And so the care burden also means there is a differential impact. And the fact is that decision-making around climate change and climate policies very often suffers from a lack of women's representation. So there's a very important nexus between solving the climate problem and ensuring that women have a voice and a role at the table. And that's why I was excited to be here and to participate in Qazaq to bring attention to some of these issues.
You came here for a visit to talk about the entire region. What other goals bring you here? And what other work do you hope to accomplish?
So UN Women is the world's only multilateral agency with a specific focus on gender equality and women's empowerment. And we have a long-standing partnership with the government of Kazakhstan, which we want to deepen, actually, this partnership. And so I came because I wanted to meet with Kazakh government officials, the private sector, civil society, get a sense of the accomplishments that have been made in the last few years on gender equality and women's empowerment, and come up with some ideas and initiatives for how we can strengthen the partnership even more.
Mm-hmm. Well, about these accomplishments, can you comment on the situation of women in Kazakhstan overall? Because over the past years, the government changed the laws regarding women and children quite a lot. Do these changes work, and what we should focus on more?
I think there are a number of areas where there has been progress. For example, the government has recently completed the National Action Plan under UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which accords a very specific role to women, peace and security, and conflict-related processes. So that's a major milestone, and we're very happy that the government has done that. There has also been a quota agreed upon whereby now 30% of seats in parliament will be reserved for women, young people, and people with disabilities. There is a discussion of the need to make sure there is legislation that makes domestic violence a criminal activity, which it is not right now. So we feel that there has been progress, but we also feel that more can be done. For example, while the quota is great, we actually think that there should be a quota just for women, because when you have a quota that says women, young people, and people with disabilities, you might end up inadvertently having, 30% of the seats being occupied by young men. So then, even though you had the good intent, the implementation may lead to some consequences you hadn't thought of. We think the criminalization of domestic violence is essential, because domestic violence is something that is a major problem worldwide. And the only way that you can deal with it is to have the right legal and regulatory framework, which means making it a criminal activity and making sure perpetrators are brought to justice. So good progress, more can be done. We're here to partner to help make that happen.
What do you think are the barriers in advancing rights and opportunities of women in Kazakhstan? And how can we hope to remove them?
You know, there are barriers in many parts of the world. So Kazakhstan is not unique in having cultural barriers, gender stereotypes, and attitudes towards women which get in the way of changing some of this. And by the way, these attitudes are not just attitudes that are held by men, they're sometimes held by women themselves. Now, I've met lots of remarkable women in the last 2 days that I've been here, leaders, you know, the National Commission of Women, the Ombudsman, the Deputy of the National Commission on Women, many of the women participating in EcoJair. So what I see is that Kazakhstan has a lot of really capable, well-trained women leaders. We'd like to see even more of that, and I think if we can address the cultural barriers and the gender stereotypes, we will see more of that.
That would be very good. Well, let's talk about the region overall, because recently Turkmenistan rolled out a number of laws concerning women, especially banning certain cosmetic procedures and generally restricting their actions. Why is this happening? Where do these laws come from? Can we expect similar bans in other countries?
I certainly hope not, because these laws are really oppressing women's rights. And, you know, you asked where did they come from? I think there is a real pushback against women's rights in many parts of the world. And we are seeing more and more countries doing things and passing laws that would have been considered impossible some time ago. So, you know, when those of us who work on these issues every day look at the state of the world, one way I like to describe it is we are running to stay in place. And we are re-legislating some of the things that we had already legislated, and some of the rights that we had gained many years ago. We're having to refight for those same rights. So these laws, you know, we do not agree with them because they put very specific restrictions on what women can do and women cannot do, including can they drive, can they not drive, you know, their clothing. Regulation of these kinds are oppressive for women because they take away their agency and their ability to make their own choices about whether they want to drive or not, what they want to wear, how they want to dress. This is fundamental.
Are there any, I don't know, scientific or maybe political, geopolitical reasons behind this? Why is this happening? Why is the race to stay in place happening all the time?
Well, you know, the world has just seen a regression in many areas. We have seen a great deal of regression on human rights in many countries. We have seen the rise of illiberal democracies. We have seen a rise in populist governance. And there is a bit of an unholy alliance between certain regimes as well as the exercise and the ability to exercise rights in those countries. And very often, women's rights are affected as well. So there just is we're just going through a historical phase where there is a real pushback against women's rights. Part of the explanation, according to some people, is that women's rights are actually advancing, and those who hold the existing power structures don't like it. So this pushback is because we are winning. And because we are making progress, you know, it is creating antibodies and it is creating this huge blowback.
Mm-hmm. That's one way to look at it.
That is one way to look at it.
Well, speaking of historical things, the Ukrainian conflict caused a lot of shock when people found out about the violence against women in Ukrainian cities that were occupied by Russia. The question is, why does war always come hand in hand with violence, especially violence against women and children? How can we stop or even prevent it? And what other threats do Ukrainian women face today?
Let me just start by saying that we strongly echo the Secretary General's call for an end to this war, for a cessation of hostilities and the restoration of peace. You know, the Russian aggression must stop now. And we are very concerned about the issue that you raised about sexual violence in conflict. We see this not just in the case of Ukraine, but in other places. In the specific case of Ukraine, there needs to be an investigation into these war crimes. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has called out what is happening in Ukraine now. This is a violation of humanitarian law, of international human rights law, and it is sadly very common in conflict zones and in war zones. At the United Nations, we have several resolutions condemning the use of violence in conflict, and we have a lot of programs to work on prevention. But that means we have to have education of men, create awareness about why this is wrong. We have to have shelters for women where they can shelter. But when you are internally displaced, as are the women and children of Ukraine, you know, and when you look at the fact that 70% of all refugees in the world are women and children, it is really impossible actually to avoid these levels of violence. So the world needs to stand up and say that this will not be tolerated, that this is a violation of human rights, and that we will bring perpetrators to justice. And, you know, unless the world speaks up about the awful atrocities that we are seeing in Ukraine and brings this to justice through calling them war crimes, through investigations of human rights violations, you know, our soldiers will feel that they have impunity and can carry on doing this.
Yes. Thank you very much for this very interesting and fruitful talk. We will see you next time.